to alert Dr. Terrell that she can start her presentation at this moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Father Kingsley. I would like to begin by sort of reminding us of our last conversation where we started out looking at the father in general, in terms of what was going on in terms of our perspective on fathers and their relationship to the development of children. And the special emphasis in terms of the things that are relevant to the African-American father. And today's discussion, I think, is totally relevant, considering not only what's going on in terms of our culture, but also in terms of trying to understand the role that the father plays in terms of his children. When I chose to do this research, it was based upon the assumption that African-American fathers had very little research done on them in terms of trying to understand who they were in the context of their families, and also in the context of their relationship to their children in the relationship. And of course, one of the deciding factors in terms of that was looking at the impact oppression and discrimination has on what a father brings to the table for his children. So what we're looking at today would be some of the research that contributes to that. And my decision today was to make some decisions in terms of defining some of the factors that I found in our research that was really, really relevant. And to begin with that was to look at what does multicultural perspective mean, and to define that in terms of what was I looking for. The research, basically, we began looking at the patriarchal system as it was, what that meant to the individual as a whole, and also looking at it in terms of when you look at cultural, you talk about multiple factors. You're talking about the relationship of the father, not only within his cultural dynamics, but the exterior culture, the dynamics of where he works and the people that he's around and what he exposes his children and his family to, and what those experiences are like. Multicultural in our country in particular, because we're such a diverse country, has a lot to do with not just the religious cultures, but also ethnic culture. The dynamics that looks at other kinds of cultures, the institutions in which a person is raised. Law enforcement has a culture of his own. Military has a culture of his own. Medicine, law, social work, psychology, all of those professions have a culture unto itself because of the nature of their training and the nature of the populations that they serve. And one of the things that are really relevant to looking at multicultural is how those shape us as people. And one of the things that was most interesting to me in teaching multiculturalism and diversity over the years is that it keeps evolving, that it doesn't just look at the relationship between the ethnic groups, but also how those ethnic groups become one when they have something in common. And those things add to their sense of their identity in terms of where they're raised and the language they speak, the rituals, the traditions, the customs, the values. All of those things are contributing factors. And I think a challenge for us as Americans is understanding that we live in a multicultural society, and we have the choice of adapting the parts of that that are relevant to us and relevant to the population that we serve. And I think the most significant part of that, of course, at this point, has to do with not just the Black father, but the world in which he lives. And I think I mentioned last time that one of the videos that I recommended was from Elijah Cummings, who was raised in the Baltimore area. But his father came from the South, and of course has seen a lot of discrimination and oppression. And how his father reacted to him getting his law degree, and thinking about his life in terms of if he had had the opportunities, how much better his life would have been. But I think the blessing for Senator Cummings was that his father was strong enough to combine those things and still be a good father. And I think one of the things I mentioned last time was that what his father would do was take sometimes 15 to 30 minutes to sit outside of their home, so that when he walked in the house, he wouldn't bring his anger and his frustration with him to his family, because he did not feel that that was the appropriate way to raise his sons. So we can talk more about multicultural, but I wanted to add to that our definition of ethnic socialization. We believe ethnic socialization really conceptualizes a father's sense of not only his community, but also the community that he raises his children in. Because one of the things the research indicated to me from the instruments that I used to survey the fathers was that even if they moved out of the neighborhood where they were raised, or they moved out of the area where they were raised, they took with them the rituals, the customs, the traditions that they were raised with, because those were the things that they identified with. And that means everything from taking them to cultural fairs. If you notice that those things are really relevant to a lot of people, that they take their children when there's a Greek fair and there is an Italian fest, or there are other kinds of fests that are related to that ethnic group, that it overflows with people that are not only from the old country or the old neighborhood, but also those that no longer live there, but they've embraced those as a part of their personal identity. So ethnic socialization are not just those things that we value when we're growing up. It's the things that are the things that we pass on to our children in terms of how we celebrate Christmas, how we celebrate Thanksgiving. What do we do when there's a wedding? And what do we do when there's a funeral? Our foods, our dress, our tone of voice when we're explaining things or we're accepting things. And all of that includes, of course, embracing our religious beliefs, what those are. And you will find in some families that there's actually a tradition that when they move away from the original neighborhood, they're more rigid about maintaining those traditions than there are when they still live there. And the reason for that is when you move away, you don't have the neighbors in the grocery store clerk or the butcher or any of those people to still pass on those traditions and things that you knew and remember from your childhood. But you have to make that a part of what you bring home to your children, the foods, the drinks, how you celebrate, the words and the definitions of things that you knew and embraced as a child. And all of those things are our socialization. And I think we're not surprised at how we grow up. And sometimes when we move away, we take with us all of those things. We embrace those things. And we embrace those things in a way that they become a part of what the children also identify with. And they make them a part of who they are in terms of not only their ethnic community, but also in terms of how they see themselves in the context, not only of that community, because even when you live elsewhere in the world, and that's the father and the mother, they bring pieces of the messages they received as children to that next relationship. Ethnic identity fits into the same thing. Ethnic identity very much identifies with how you see yourself. And you would be amazed in many ways of looking at how two children that are brought up in the same family, one will totally embrace the ethnic identity of one parent, and the other one will totally embrace the ethnic identity of the other parent. But when they get in the outer world, they find out based upon either their physical appearance or their religion, what else, that they are generalized in terms of how they see those things. And those things are the things that allow us to either incorporate the exterior community, or we decide for ourselves the parts of that you want to defend and you want to make a part of your personal identity. So ethnic identity, in many instances, is your racial identity. It's the racial group that you identify with. And there's always a surprise when somebody will say, she looks, she's very fair, or she looks Italian, or she looks something else. And that person will say, however, I am Hispanic, or I am African American, regardless of how they're raised. And I think over the years, of course, with African Americans or Black people, you will find that whether you are 1% Black or 3% Black in our culture, in this country, if there's any percentage of you that is considered to be African, you are a Black person. And people accept that, they embrace that, and they make that a part of their identity. And it does not create any issues for them in terms of the larger community in which they belong. So ethnic socialization would be the activities, the ritual, the custom, the traditions that you bring into your relationship, not only to your spouse, but also to your children. And the ethnic identity in all instances has to do with your racial identity, the family members, the race that you belong to. Now, when we look at the multicultural perspective, ethnic socialization, and ethnic identity, all of those things are the things that make up the father's idea of himself. It adds to his understanding of not only his family, what we call genogram. And I used to have my students do something. I had a course that I offered called Who Am I in the Ethnic Sense? And you would think I was asking them to write a paper on a scientific rediscovery, mainly because looking at yourself in terms of your ethnic identity is very hard work, because sometimes your family, based upon how they see themselves, have never really explored it. And when you look at our families, Black families, African-American families, we've had so many issues, socialization issues to deal with in terms of oppression, discrimination, lack of opportunity, that looking at your family dynamics, your family background has always been like a luxury in itself in more ways than not. And so it's one of those things that has allowed itself to become a part of our research in terms of how does a man become able to become a father if he does not know his own background, if he does not know where he got this from and where he got that from. Because when you look at the genogram, and I know there are a lot of people that look at, I think is the DNA studies now, where people go back and say, I did not know that my great-grandfather was a physician or a lawyer. And I understand now that maybe that's where my passion for law came from. Or I did not know that my great aunt or my grandmother was a nurse. Maybe that's where those caregiving skills come from with me. So all of those things are ingredients that add to your sense of who you are as a person, and also what you bring to the table in your relationship to your children. If you don't know yourself, you have very little to pass on to a child. And those were the things that I looked at in terms of my research, in terms of how do you get to asking a father about his relationship to his children while asking him about who he is as a person. I had a great response from the fathers in terms of looking at their ethnic identity, their ethnic socialization, and of course, looking at them in terms of issues with self-esteem and things of those factors, mainly because those were the things that created their personality traits. When you know your family, you know where you came from. And I think one of the things I said last time that was really, really important was that you are not able to really be available to another person unless you have some sense of where you came from. And that's why those very first relationships with your mother, with your father, are so significant in the sense that they give you messages about not only who you are, but where you came from. They are also the ones that give you a great sense of your self-worth. Parents that listen to their little children, even when you don't understand basically what they're saying, they get the message that they matter, that what they think and what they feel make a difference. And that's really important to how we develop as individuals. And it gives you an opportunity to be a nurturing and supportive person to another person. And those are the most significant parts of it. So a lot of people have actually taken the time and gone back and looked at their family dynamics. Sometimes you will find that in my students, a lot of them, especially when they came from families where, say, the grandmother or the great-grandmother the grandfathers had really, would you say, traumatic childhoods, they didn't want to talk about the past. So they would have to go back and do research on their own to get information about the family dynamics. And so, finding out things about, a missing grandfather or a missing father sometimes leave a young man at a deficit in terms of what do I bring to the table for my children if I don't know very much about myself. So that's one of the greater challenges that we found. And the ones that I work with through their education, and remember, I chose educated men that had the opportunity through their education, through the military, through other things, to figure out where their strengths were, where their weaknesses were, where those were things that they had questions about themselves. In terms of, it makes a lot of difference in terms of making their childhood important. And one of the things to mention is that sometimes these men are not necessarily raised by their African-American parents. Remember, they're children that are adopted and that are raised in multicultural families. And one of the things that's very important for you to remember is that when a child is adopted by a person in another ethnic group, they are required to bring that child up with information about their culture. They are required to actually take them back. I've worked with families where I did the assessment on the adoptive parents. And if they adopted a child from Guatemala or from China, they have to make a commitment that sometime in that child's life, not only do they take them to Chinatown, they take them to places where that culture is a part of them, but they make a commitment to make that a part of how they raise that child with a sense of where he or she came from, what that culture represents, what the strengths are and the weaknesses, and to encourage them to know more about that background. So children that are raised by people from other cultural groups, there is a commitment through the agency that does the adoption, that they not only remain available to that family and to those children, but that the adoptive parents take those children back to and make them very much aware of the culture from which they come. So that was a very good question. Public policy in the past, and I have to say we're doing much better with this now than we have in the past, is that most of the public policies were geared to providing financial support to a mother that was raising her children on her own. There was no consideration given at that point to the child's father or his family, in fact. One of those traditions was the Department of Children and Family Services. Every state in the United States of America has a Department of Children and Family Services. It is a national mandate. They are supported by the state, but they're supported primarily by the federal government. The policies in the very beginning were geared to looking at the father, basically, if he was not there, as not being vital to the services to the mother. And I think I may have mentioned this last time. And it was also considered to be a contributing factor to breaking up Black families in the 50s or 60s and the 70s, that if the father was there, a mother could not get financial support. But the way things are set up now, there are a lot of conversations where if the mother, say for mental illness or substance abuse or even death or a long-term illness, is not able to be the primary caregiver of the children, that the father be considered a valuable resource. And one of the things that the young colleagues that I'm supervising now will tell you is that they immediately look at the father. They provide the same resources to the father as they used to the mother, in the sense that, say, for instance, he's working, he's doing all the things that he can do, but his income is not enough to provide, say, for their long-term counseling needs, for their health needs, for their dental needs, for anything they need for school and for their education. So the way policies are set up now, they supplement the income not only of the father, but also his family if the father, say, is not able to take on the responsibility. So it's not just the father now, it's the father's family that has become a resource to what we call the child welfare system, even the mental health system, in terms of finding a family member to take care of children when the mother or the father are not available because of mental illness, substance abuse, military service that's rendering them unable to do the parenting, or even with a diagnosis of long-term inability, physical disability. There are programs now that will help the family provide for those things. So public policy has embraced the father. They've embraced the fact that even if he's not in the picture, there has to be public announcements when his children are, say, being surrendered to the state for long-term care. The father has to be notified. And if there's no address or anything else, there has to be a public notice in the paper. And sometimes that's how a father finds out not only he has a child, but he has a child that needs him. So that makes a difference as well. I think when we look at paternity, you will see that has changed long-term in terms of, in many instances, a father was not given complete custody of his children. If you would find in our country now, and this is a percentage that a lot of people have been surprised at over the years, is that there is a good 15 to 20% of mothers that walk away from their children. And for whatever reason, that was not a statistical fact for a long time. And when the mother walks away, the children end up in the system unless the father comes forth and asks for or fight for full custody of his children. And because of the way the policies were set before, the way that things are done now, if the mother has decided that she no longer wants the responsibility for her children, the courts will provide the support to the father that they would to the mother if there are no extenuating circumstances in terms of him having the same issues, say, for instance, as the mother. So paternity is kind of equal opportunity now. And from my experience in working in the system for many years, you have to believe that that is a plus for the child. Because one of the things we've learned over the years is that when children don't know one or the other of their parents, and that's one of the reasons public policy has changed in terms of adoption. For years, a child that was adopted, the case was closed, and he could not, or the parents could not go back and find out who adopted the children. The father has a right now to investigate and look into the adoptive parents and reach out to his children if he chooses to. And that's very important. And that means the children have the same rights. And I think for a lot of reasons that's relevant. When you think about the biological makeup of children and adults, you need to know your physiological makeup, the biology of your makeup. You need to know the history of mental illness. You need to know the family history of substance abuse. And you will find with a lot of people when, say, for instance, they reach a certain age and they're diagnosed with something where a transplant may be necessary, or they need to know, if this is a genetic predisposition, they're able to get that information. And a lot of that is in their records. So very important. Child custody, as I said a few minutes ago, is one of the things that a lot of people have been really surprised at, is that over the years, and I think one of the things that's relevant now is that we have a lot of people coming back, males and females coming back from the war. We've had 2 wars since 2001. That included males and females. That means that the mother, as much as the father, can come back, no physical disability, but mentally in need of ongoing treatment and a support system for the children when they aren't able to be there. So what you're finding is that the grandparents have not only adopted, but also have become primary caregivers for their grandchildren, because they had the children when the parents were like enlisted in serving in the military. That's one category. Another category, of course, is that we're also dealing with a substance abuse war in the country right now. One of the things that the courts have changed over the years, that child welfare has changed over the years, is looking at what do we do when the parent wants to be involved and emotionally and or physically aren't able to do it on their own. So there are a lot of services they can put in place, like caregivers that come in and help with the caregiving for the kids while the father works or when the father is in treatment. But in many instances, you will find that grandparents have become the primary caregivers for the children over the last, I would say, the 10, 15 years. And many of them have embraced it. But the support that's been given to the parents is now being given to the grandparents. And remember, a grandfather can be a father figure if the father is unable to be that person. In many families, that has been the case, where the grandfather or a great uncle has been the support system for that child, that tells them about their father and their mother, and tells them and embracing them in the family's tradition of how they celebrate music, their style of dress, their religious beliefs, their community service, and creating within the child, instilling in them a sense of their self-worth. That's so valuable. How do children benefit? There are no words, and especially now when we're looking at oppression, discrimination, a lack of resources in certain communities. And I think this pandemic, in many instances, has made us realize how limited resources are in certain communities. And when we look at the fathers that I did my research on, they were middle class and above, because I think I mentioned to you, I started out with a certain income range, and because of men being interested in being a part of this research and being in corporate America and in other professions, the income range went up. However, based upon what's happening in our country today, you have to understand that the Black male is a major source of discussion at this point. And the reason for that, of course, has to do with not only what's happening with the George Floyd situation, what has happened in terms of the pandemic, the number of people in the Black community that have been affected by the pandemic, the lack of resources in certain communities to get the vaccine, and all of those things that, and a lot of people are saying this, is that it basically has revealed to us that we still have a long ways to go in terms of, I think, accepting or assuming that all the things we need are available to us. When it comes to children having a sense of their self-worth and how to prepare themselves for being a part of this culture, having a Black male talk to them about not only the realities of the country we live in, how they should behave in terms of the country we live in, there are no words to describe how valuable that is. And part of that has to do with the men that I interviewed from the research that I have. One of the messages that they all shared with me that was consistent was they all were told how to behave. They were all told about the dangers. And I know that you've heard, whether it's from television or from others, the conversation about having the talk with your children about how to behave when they're pulled over by a police officer, or even having the talk with them about someone asking them, exactly what are you? You know, what is your ethnic group? And having a sense of that. One of the things that those of us with children that come from multiculturals, in, of course, in 2021, people marry who they love. And sometimes the person they love does not belong to the same ethnic group as they do. Part of the father's role is not only to give them realities of, and I saw a commercial that was very revealing, and there's a young man that says, when I take off this uniform, what do you see? In our culture, the reality is they see a Black male. They see a person that fits a stereotype that unfortunately we still fighting to this day. And yet a father has to teach the child, you can't walk around with a chip on your shoulder because being angry is a deterrent to you learning and getting along with and understanding that everyone is not the same. Everyone's perspective is not the same. And I think it's the challenge of a Black mother as well, but the father sets the example. Growing up with a father that interacts with others, you get a message about how you should interact. What's acceptable behavior? What is not acceptable behavior? There's so many parents that said, regardless of my income, regardless of where I live, where I've raised my children, I have been pulled over numerous times. I have been questioned by the security guard at the gate for the community in which I built the first home, that he didn't believe that I lived there. And yet I don't tell my children those stories, but I will say to them, if you are questioned, you answer the question. If you're asked to do certain things, you do what's done, if it's reasonable. And therefore, you have to carry yourself in a way that you gain as much experience as you possibly can. You get the educational opportunities that are available to you, because that's the only way we break the cycle. However, we are realistic that it doesn't matter about what we carry in our heads or in our heart. It's the way that we look. When you are visibly different, your life experience is different. And that was one of the reasons when I did this research, one of the first things that my committee chair asked me, he says, are you aware that oppression and discrimination is going to interfere with a Black man being a good father? And I said, I'm aware of that, but I also believe that there are good fathers, because I had one. And my father grew up in a much more oppressive era than, say, my husband or my sons or other people in the community. And therefore, I want to hear what they have to say about what their messages are going to be to their children about the things that are happening, because they can't miss it. It's in the news every day. It's a reality in terms of the culture in which we live. What are the messages do we give our sons and our grandsons and our great grandsons about how to carry ourselves, and the realities of sometimes it doesn't matter how you carry yourself, but that you are aware of the danger and you do everything you possibly can to not be harmed. One of the examples of that, of course, was the lieutenant that was stopped in Virginia very recently in his military uniform. And the fact that when they started to pull him over, he went to where it was light, where he could be seen, and he videotaped the whole thing. Those are the kind of things, unfortunately, as a Black father, you have to tell your children. Be patient, be courteous, do the things you're expected to do, and realize that this is not you. This is not about you. It's about our culture. And these are the things that we absolutely have to change. And maybe you can be an instrument of that change. The social economic changes that have changed a lot of this has been the fact that our educational opportunities are greater now than they have ever been. The thing that's interesting, there are a lot more Black males with PhDs and extended degrees. And of course, the higher income. The bottom line is there are more Black women with PhDs that continue to choose to get that higher degree than their male counterpart. And a lot of that, of course, has to do with the male income is higher than the female, even with the PhD. So that's an interesting piece of all of that. However, with educational opportunities, socioeconomics changes. We live where we want to live. But what we do in our challenge and our children's benefit is that we take our culture with us. When I talked about ethnic identity and our ethnic socialization, those are the pieces of us that we take to the community, no matter where we live. You live on the street where you're the only one of your kind. Your behavior is the same as it would be if you lived on the street with all the people of your kind. You are courteous and speak to your neighbors, participate in your neighborhood events if there are things you're interested in doing, but you maintain your cultural values within your home, your religious values, your rituals in terms of the holidays, your style of dress, your music, the music that we were raised with, that goes from the spiritual music to jazz, contemporary jazz, to all of the things that we've embraced that came from our culture over the years that we identify with. And we share those things with our children and let them pick and choose the pieces that resonate with them. That's really, really important. So as social economics have changed, but some things do not, no matter where you live, you have to carry yourself in a certain way so that, and I think the challenge for many is that we sometimes become, it can be a burden, but you become the representative of your group. And that's a burden in itself, but it's also a reality. And it's really, really important for us to be able to use our education to pass on to the next generation. And I've said to many that the most important part of getting an education, I said to the students that I'm working with now and to the ones in the past, is that there will come a time when you will have the luxury of giving of your time, because it's a commitment. It goes with the territory that children need to hear from you. One of the organizations that we started is called Brother to Brother. It's an African-American group that we started at the University of St. Francis Because what we noticed over the years and with the Institute for Institutional Diversity is young African Americans would come there and they would leave at the end of their freshman year. Nobody knew why. And so the goal was to set up a support system for them among other African American students so that they had someone to identify with, but also to talk to when, say, either they were struggling with socialization or they were struggling with academics. The assumption by some of my colleagues was that they were struggling with academics. Some of these were some of the brightest students from around the state, so that was not my perception. My perception was it was a campus that had a percentage of diversity, and then you had the athletes, you had the scholars, and there wasn't a place in the middle for students that needed the support of both. And the brother to brother served that purpose. We started it 12 years ago, and it is still flourishing, where the students are officers. They go to workshops that looks at leadership on a national level. They do workshops on the university campus. They dress for their meetings in their professional garb, whether it's shirt and tie, always shirt and tie for the meetings. And they support each other as they struggle. And our percentage, I only had one during the 10 years that I was running the program that did not complete the program with us, but he completed it closer to home because his family needed him. But it's programs like that through socialization. Corporations helped us set this up. And it is a national program that's on every university campus in the country now that are interested in supporting their students of color. When we look at the extended family network, we're talking about the mother's family, the father's family. And remember, we've lost a lot of our people in these two wars that we've had over the last couple of years. And it was really important that we keep in mind that always in the African-American family, in the Black family, that if a family member couldn't take care of their children, they would bring the children home. They would bring the child to either an aunt and uncle or their grandparents, or even the great grandparents if they were young enough and physically able enough to take care of the children. And that's where the peace of mind came from, is extended family. So one of the things that children get, if they don't get all of the family history and support and messages about themselves from their parents, they've got the extended family that carry that on. And that's why you'll find, even if a father and mother move out of, say, the neighborhood that they grew up in, they visit on a regular basis. They have time that they share with their family, so that that part of what nurtured them is nurturing to their children. And it makes all the difference in the world for children to have their extended family. Even in some grandparents, if the family lives in California, they would make an effort to get the grandchildren, go and get the grandchildren and keep them for a summer or a holiday or whatever that was. And that becomes a part of the ritual and the tradition, and the children are with the grandparents during the summer. They would go to fest. They would go to religious retreats. They would go to all kinds of things. They would pick up hobbies from the grandparents and messages about how the grandparents were raised, and hear stories about everything from the region of the country that they came from or to their family dynamics. So all of that is extremely valuable. Is family therapy effective if the father doesn't participate? First of all, it is not family therapy if the father doesn't participate. And most of us that are therapists will say to a family member, if they call in to say, I want family therapy for my family, but my husband's not coming. He's a very dynamic part of that family unit. He brings as much to the family dynamics as the mother does. In fact, he's as vital to the family role as anything else. And therefore, I encourage them to bring everybody in. And if I have to talk to that father, because sometimes it's the mother who doesn't see the need for the therapy. I've actually had fathers call and say, my family needs treatment, but I'm not sure if my wife is interested in coming in. And what I basically have encouraged them to do is the two of them come in first, and then we bring the children in and make them a part of the treatment, because what's happening affects everyone. And therefore it's very important for the father to be there. But it's not family therapy if the father is not a participant. Is a father who's involved in drug or crime entitled to be involved with his children? That's a part of the child's family dynamics. And whether he's involved with drugs or the criminal, institutions, you have to find out from the child if they have any relationship with that parent. And you will find if they don't, they want to. And once they know what's going on with that parent and they've been around that parent, to deny them is basically encouraging them to believe that there's a piece of them that's not valuable. So that is not a good thing to do. In fact, you never show disrespect to the father or the mother in front of the children, because the children see themselves as a part of that individual. And it's very important for them to see that in a positive way. A household income is extremely stretched. Now, how can I afford family counseling? First of all, family counseling is free in a lot of places. If you call Catholic Charities, no matter where you live, or any agency that runs Catholic Charities, and I know there's a Catholic Charities USA, so there's branches in every city. They see a family on a sliding scale. In other words, if you've got a limited income, they will see you based upon what you can afford. And if that's $5, then $5 it is. And they give you the same professional commitment they would if you were able to pay, say, the full fee. So family therapy is not denied to a family because they have limited income. How do I find a therapist? First of all, every city, every community have mental health divisions. Every community has religious resources available to them. Every Catholic organization has religious options, counseling options available to them. And if they don't know, they can come up with a list. In fact, I would like to create a list that I know would be applicable to all of you, regardless of where you live, that I know about. So for our last meeting, I will include in that session a list of community resources that can help you find what you need in terms of therapy. And if I don't happen to like the therapist I'm given, then you basically say to the person that, usually a therapist has a director of their agency. And if they're director of their agency, you can say, for a variety of reasons, I'm not able to, I'm not comfortable working with you. Can you refer me to someone else in your agency? And usually they will do that. There is not a problem with a therapist saying, if you're not comfortable working with me, I can find someone else within the agency that you can work with. I will say this about choosing a therapist is that choosing someone of your same ethnic group is not required. But you need to have someone, say, for instance, that is comfortable talking about discrimination and oppression, your frustration with community resources or public policies that at this point seem to add to the detriment of the Black family. You need to be able to say to them, I want to be able to talk about my life experiences as a Black person. Are you comfortable with that? That's very important to the process. And the therapist has an obligation to be honest enough to say, I don't have a lot of experience in that area. However, I know someone that does. And they will provide you with that information. That is a professional commitment. One of the things that I've done over the years in providing things that I've written over the years that had to do with mental health in the diverse community is I've challenged my colleagues in social work, psychology, psychiatry, that if you're going to work with human beings with emotional disorders, then you need to be comfortable hearing their story. That means knowing as much about their ethnicity, about what their daily experiences can be about, that you are able to sit and listen and provide them with your whole self, not sit there and not be comfortable interacting with them, because then once again, we've let them down. That's not acceptable. So I've challenged my colleagues over the years that you have people that belong to these diverse groups that understand what it's like to be visibly different, what's it like to be assumed to be less than, and that those people have worked through those issues and chose to be therapists of some kind. And that's very, very important. Okay.
Thank you
Questions?
so much, Dr. Terrell. Can you hear me now very clearly?
Yes, I can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. And I just want to remind our attendees, you can continue to send your comments or your questions through the chat. Dr. Terrell, the first question, Andrew wants to know how to know more about the Genogram tool that you talked about and how we can take advantage of it in order to better understand ourselves and our family. So what can you say on that, about the Genogram?
The Genogram looks at your family, and it looks at like the grandfather's family, your grandmother's family, and it gives you background like when they lived and when they died, and sometimes even where they're buried, those kind of things, what they did in their lives, where did they come from. All of those things are really, really relevant. And I genuinely believe it helps a person have a sense of their self-worth when they're able to do that. So it's something anybody can do.
Okay. Is there any recommendation where people can have access to the Genogram, or?
They can actually go online and I think basically they can put the word in Genogram and they'll see an example of one. Because what it is, it's your family tree.
Okay.
That's exactly what the Genogram is.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, you also talked about customs and traditions that help to shape one's identity. Can you talk a little bit about that? And so say that in reference to the African American community, what are some of these customs and traditions that help shape the Black male, the Black father?
I think some of the traditions would be, and I think about this in terms of family, is how they get together. For instance, with families in most families on Memorial Day, a lot of people see that as a day off from work and doing things. In a lot of Black families, they go to the gravesite of their loved ones. They clean them off. And of course, there's food afterwards or before, but everybody goes, including the children. They clean off the grave sites and they say a prayer, that kind of thing. In fact, there's a cemetery very close to here. And a couple of weeks ago on Easter Sunday, I noticed that there was a family there where they had food and all the relatives were there, and they were all surrounding the gravesite for a family member. And those are traditions in some families, is that they all show up at the same time. The other part, of course, is getting together, after a funeral, a repast, which is something that we've always had is afterwards. Of course, the pandemic has basically kind of destroyed a lot of that for people over the last year or so. But if people getting together after the funeral, having food, being there for each other. When a family member dies, family, friends, you go to your neighbor, you go to your friend, you take them food so that they don't have to worry about eating and things during that time. You take them whatever it is you think that will allow them the time to start preparing for the ritual of the funeral and not have to worry about food for the family while they're doing that. So there are a lot of little things that are left there.
Awesome, awesome. Do you think it's worthwhile or necessary that the African American males, they need to maybe know about African culture and tradition more deeply than maybe what they know right now? Do you think that would be helpful also?
I think a lot of them have actually learned. One of the things that I noticed, I was in Africa in 2001, and we went to a museum that showed the connection between the American Black and the African, and that includes everything from our music to our dance, to the fact that fraternities and sororities have these rituals that they have out that I don't think for many of them knew for many years that those came from our African heritage. Music and dance are very much a part of our culture. They were showing some of the connections between Muhammad Ali, Michael Jordan, and things like that. And what's very interesting is that those people that are American, they are very well known in those parts of the world. And there are a lot of things that from the foods that we eat, the use of, certain animals that we eat, that are so important to our survival over the years came from our African heritage. The vegetables and things like that we use, the greens, the animals that we've learned how to preserve and keep, especially during the winter months when we weren't able to work like we used to. All of those came from our African traditions. And like I said, a lot of fathers have taken the time to get to know those things and share them with their children and realize we didn't lose everything when we came here. We brought certain traditions with us. The foods, the yams, and all of those things were things that were part of the tradition that we brought from Africa and have maintained over the years. So yes, I agree with you that parts of our African heritage is very vital to who we are now.
Thank you.
Yes.
We have about just about 15 minutes more, so I would encourage the attendees to please continue to write down your comments or your questions through the chat so that we can
There's a hand up.
Say that again.
Broussard is asking a question.
Okay, I think she wrote here, oh, sorry, I don't know. She said, can you address how multiculturalism affects Black male children raised by white parents?
Well, one of the things I said earlier was that even if they're raised by a white family, there's a commitment made by the adoptive agency that they absolutely must raise the child with some understanding of their culture and where they came from. And I don't, as a social work practitioner over the years, when I first got started, children of different ethnic groups were not adopted by other ethnic groups. However, I also understood that if it's a loving adoptive family, there's a story, I believe now on Lifetime about a foster child that was placed with a Black family and she was white. And the courts fighting or someone fighting with the family about them not adopting her. And yet it's been done with Black children over many years. The child has to have a sense of their culture or they struggle. I have more than one colleague in social work that has adopted children from other cultural groups. And they've made major efforts to make sure those children knew their community and knew people from those communities, because it's a struggle. There's nothing worse than being brought up to believe that you're the only one of your kind and not have anyone to help you get a sense of your self-worth.
Thank you. Dr. Terrell, I know that religion and spirituality is a deeply held value system in the African American community. And what we're saying, and I'm saying this as a priest, what we're saying is that in our churches right now, many African American men are no longer interested. You know, they are no longer coming, not interested, but they are no longer coming. So we have more females than male. You know, the attendance, the male attendance is, you know, decreasing every day. Why do you think this is so? And what can we do in order to, you know, to bring that up, to bring them back to the church?
That's a good question. And I tell you, one of the reasons why I'm saying that is, look at what's happening right now in terms of our country. I think it has to be very difficult for our males to be as trusting as perhaps they should be. And one of the things about our church is that it's not as representative of us as it could or should be. That's my personal opinion. I think the women are able, and they know for the children, it's very important. In fact, I think it adds to our opportunity to find release and solace, in the sense that we're able to find some messages in the readings, you know, doing Mass, that reassures us that not only are things going to get better, but also that we are also God's children. I think it's hard. And I think right now, being a Black male right now, especially, I think it's discouraging. It's very discouraging. And in some ways, our church is not changing as fast as perhaps it should be, or it could be. And I don't think it's just African-American males. I don't see as many males of other ethnic groups. And my parish is pretty multicultural in its own way. There are still often more women there than men. So the only thing I would say, maybe you could start, I know the suggestion has been to start men's groups, where men, you know, get a chance to read the Bible together and talk about the way they feel about what's happening in the culture right now, what's happening in the country, because we don't have just social justice issues. We have political unrest. We've got the pandemic. You know, we've got a lot of young people that have come home from the last 2 wars that are severely damaged. So support groups are, I think, to me, are key resources in major communities in terms of providing people with a place to be heard. I really do.
Thank you. And you also talked about stereotypes and, you know, discrimination, and we know that these things will continue to be there. You know, it has been there for a long time. It's not getting better. It's always there. So what are some of the strategies you think that Black men should adopt in order to just live above this stereotype? Because it's almost as if they cannot be changed. They're always there. We talk about it, we see in the news and all the time. So what are some of the strategies you think Black men should and must adopt in order to live above these stereotypes?
You know, I think one of the things, and, you know, we've talked about this in terms of the messages a father gives his children, is that, and I think even mothers at this point, is sort of like, you know, children are part of social media all the time. And so they know what's happening. And of course, we had the trial for the last couple of weeks. And on top of that, we've had this other unfortunate thing to happen over the weekend. And it's the major discussion right now. And my sons are, one, of course, is passed, but one that is still living, we talk. And of course, he's in law enforcement. And he has multiple perspectives. He is a multicultural person, and he is in law enforcement, and he also is ex-military. So there's so much there to talk about. The only thing you can do is give them the opportunities to do just that. Talk about it. Have some place that they can hold a discussion where, you know, it's said out loud. I listened to some of the commentators on, you know, different shows, and the hurt and frustration in their voices is hard to hear. It really is. But I think, once again, we're back to support groups. I think even hotlines. I did a workshop last week for a hotline that listened to religious that call in about different things, and it was a national one. And people are feeling the need to talk because they feel isolated in the way they feel. And what we have to do is give them the opportunities to say out loud what's going on inside right now. And I think once they say it out loud, then they can talk to their children about it, and then be honest with them about it. I think that's really important.
I have a question here from Hicks. He said, I am an educator in a charter school. How might I encourage a set of parents to address gender identity with their son? The father is in the home with the mother and in-laws. The son seems to be supported in navigating his gender journey. How, as an educator, can I support the family, yet cultivate an accepting environment in class?
All right. Can you say that again?
So he says, I am an educator in a chartered school. How might I encourage a set of parents to address gender identity with their son? The father is in the home with the mother and in-laws. The son seems to be supported in navigating his gender journey. How can I, as an educator, support the family, yet cultivate an accepting environment in class?
Yes. Well, I heard the part about gender identity, and I understand the question. One of the things that, as an educator, you should have a social worker that is a part of your school district. There's also a school psychologist, but the social worker would be as instrumental as anyone in, like, having a family section with the family. And if the child is struggling with their gender identity, then maybe the social worker would be the right one to try to address that with the family. It is not an easy discussion to have, especially if the parents are in denial. So what you want to do is pull as many resources as you can possibly. Basically, let the family know you like to have them sit down and talk to the social worker, have a meeting with a social worker, explain to them, and I don't know how this person has gone about finding out the child is struggling, but it must be happening every single day somewhere in the classroom. Allow the social worker to reach out to this child and have a conversation with him or her, and let the social worker get a good feel for how that child's relationship is with the mother and the father. See which parent is supportive or not, and then go from there. That's a very good question, because that is an issue. How does a Black father deal with a child who's struggling with his or her identity? You know, and once again, they want to know what that parent thinks, because that parent is very much a part of their foundation.
Right.
And if you notice, there are some parents who will say, this is my child, I love them regardless of how they identify. And then there are others who are in denial. So it can indeed be a struggle. And it's a very good question to ask.
Thank you so much, Dr. Terrell. And I would say if you can take a few minutes to just summarize I'll give us highlight some of the key points as we're almost at the last minute of our webinar presentation.
Yeah, I think the most important things would be the thing that we talked about as a whole today. From my research, I basically found that a father's ethnic and social identity come from the way he was raised, his relationship with his parents, his relationship with his siblings, with his within that culture, how they lived, how they communicated with each other. And maybe one of the things that I left out, which is really valuable, is how they interact with each other. Are there family that hug each other and touch each other and smile? Is there laughter and joy in the home? Music in the home? Are their habits and their hobbies embraced by their parents? And a child that has been embraced and loved takes that to their relationship as parents. They take that to their children. And the way a father interacts with his child, the messages that father sends is the one that gives a child a sense of their self-worth. And when you feel like you're important, you're comfortable enough to be able to share with other people and to be comfortable being around other people. And a child that has a good relationship with his family is able to make friends and have friendships and things of that nature. And a child that is able to be giving and supportive can be a nurturing and supportive parent. That's really important. The father's lived experiences contributes to the message that he gives his children about the world. And of course, what we're dealing with right now, what we've been dealing with for the last year or two, and maybe the last 20, 30, 40 years, in terms of being a Black male. Even if you come from a multicultural family, the child that died over the weekend came from a multicultural family. His mother's from one ethnic group, his dad's from another. It's important that that child have a sense of how to carry his or herself in the public. What's acceptable behavior, what is not. Do the things it takes to be safe. And yet not walk around, and that is a challenge, to not walk around with a chip on your shoulder that, why is it I have to keep on proving myself? Why is it I have to work twice as hard as the other person to be deemed as successful or acceptable? It's a reality, and it's a reality that has to be taught at the basics with the parents. Having a strong sense of your cultural awareness prepares you for living in the world. It allows you to have self-esteem, a sense of your self-worth, that when a person disagrees with you, you can basically say, it's okay to disagree with me. It's not going to change my mind. You can say what you want, but it's not going to change my mind. I respectfully disagree with you. That's acceptable behavior. That comes from having a sense of, I'm not only okay, but I'm loved, I'm accepted, I'm worthy. And also having confidence to not only sense that I not only belong to my cultural group, I've embraced my cultural group, whether it is the most acceptable one or not, because I think we've contributed not only to society, but to the world. And that gives me a sense of belonging. That's very, very important to our relationship to our fathers, and comes from our fathers and our mothers as well.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Terrell, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I have no doubt that the knowledge shared today will positively impact our attendees and their families. Just a quick reminder that the recorded webinar and resources will be available on the NBCC website within the next couple of days. Please share them with anyone else you think might benefit from this information. The resources listed on this slide will be available on the NBCC website within just 2 days of this webinar presentation. And the webinar recording will be available there as well. If you take a picture of this slide with your cell phone, you will have the list of resources immediately available to you for your immediate use. And then again, I just want to say, to ask you to please save the date. The third webinar in this series on Black Father will be on Wednesday, May 12th at the same time. And the title of this upcoming webinar is Parenting Attitude of Black Fathers, the Contributing Factors. So please save the date and invite your friends, your family members, and all those you think might benefit from this webinar presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. Terrell, once again. And thank you to Ms. Valerie and Ms. Kim for organizing this webinar presentation. At this time, I would like us to bow down our heads in prayer as we conclude today's presentation. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your love and mercy. We thank you for this particular webinar presentation. We thank you for using Dr. Terrell to bring us much needed information on how and what we must do as Black men living here in the United States. May all the inspiring information she shared with us translate into actions that we may use it for the glory of your name, the sanctification of our lives, and for the betterment of our families and all those around us. Bless all those who have prepared this program, and bless all the attendees so that whatever they have gotten from this program, they may be able to go out and share it with their friends and relatives and be able to bless them. And now may the Almighty God in His infinite love and mercy bless and sanctify you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. Peace be with you, and thank you so much for joining us today. God bless you all.
Thank you.